Welcome to the Sporticos Football Stories podcast. Today is Friday, the 15th of November. I'm Craig Resnik-Hanson, and today I'm joined by Senior Content Manager at Roma Press and co-host of the Roma Press Podcast, Andy Mattioli. We get into Andy's unique Roma origin story, dissect the delicate balance between being a fan and a content creator, and talk about the club's current state of affairs, and so much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our chat with the one and only Andy Mattioli. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Hi, Craig. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you. Roma is a club that is very interesting right now. A lot of stuff going on, which we're going to get into. But first of all, I wanted to learn a little bit about yourself and your sort of Roma origin story, if you will. I was just watching the episode of the Roma Press Pod from a few days ago with you and John talking about the Ivan Juric sacking. And, I was listening to you passionately speak with fantastic English, but with a hint of an accent that I can't quite put my finger on. And I'm seeing on your LinkedIn, I'm seeing University of Amsterdam, I'm seeing Luxembourg. What's your story? When did you become a fan of Roma? How? Where are you from and where are you based?
Absolutely. It's a bit all over the place, as you can tell. It's quite a journey. I was, I'm from Bologna. I was born and raised there, and that was my world. Though I never connected to Bologna, for example. And I did at an early age spend some time in Rome, and that was my first introduction to that kind of spirit. I started to see, those colors, which I much rather preferred over the colors of Bologna. And mind you, Bologna were not so bad in those years either. But something about Roma, the romanticism of it, those were the years of the Scudetto, around 2001, 2002, when the club had guys like Totti and Batistuta and Montella, and it was really exciting. But then, when I was about 7, 8, my family moved to Luxembourg, and all of a sudden I found myself in this very strange, bizarre environment. Luxembourg is a country known for banking, lawyers, and European institutions. And I found myself surrounded by kids from all over the world. I was in a European school, and I was in the Italian section. And in this Italian section, most kids that were there, they were all either Juventus fans or Milan fans or Inter fans. Those were the years when those teams dominated the Italian landscape. Roma and Lazio had taken a bit of a step back. But for some reason, I remember these kids, insisting on Francesco Totti as this incredible presence. And so I started to follow those games. I got back to watching Roma, to following Roma. And, one of my most vivid memories, and sort of like a perfect encapsulation of who I am as a fan, is watching that complete annihilation of Roma at the hands of Manchester United, 7-1. I remember that at Old Trafford, Roma managed to sneak by with I think it was a 1-1 result in the first leg, and then the second leg was a complete embarrassment. I mean, we were killed, and I just remembered crying because of how brutal that game was. You could see Daniele De Rossi and Totti and Perrotta. They were all just completely devastated. And I just remember thinking as a child, like, yeah, that's, the crying because of a football game is quite an intense experience, but that's the kind of experience I want. For some reason, I was always drawn to the romanticism that Roma brought into my life. I was always drawn to the fact that it was really a club with strong ties to a certain tradition. And I was very drawn to the players that were there. You know, it was the time of Luciano Spalletti's team, and you had guys like Pizarro and De Rossi emerging as one of the best midfielders in Italy, and you had Totti, who after lifting the World Cup was still in unbelievable shape. Those were for me like the golden years where Roma battled against Inter, you know, and for some reason the fact that they were never the favorites resonated with me. Perhaps I was also some kind of underdog in my own environment, you know, growing up outside of my comfort zone. I was all of a sudden thrown into this international environment. I had to learn to speak French. I had to exactly get my English up to par with the others, because otherwise I would not have any friends. And for some reason, just Roma were there at that moment in time. They were there. They were the underdog in Serie A, and that spoke to me, and it continues to speak to me. The years, you know, have passed. Roma have changed quite a lot, but there are some things, as you could probably tell from our last video episode of the podcast, that haven't changed. The feelings that Roma still evoke in me are just the same as when I was 7 or 8 years old.
And are you still based in Luxembourg now?
Well, my family is. I travel a bit all over the place. I usually spend most of the time moving about in Spain. I like the warmer climate if I can. Luxembourg is not exactly that. It's quite rainy, quite unpleasant, and it's also a very small world. It's a small reality, and I think, you know, as long as you're a teenager, it's all fine and dandy. But then there comes a time where you need to leave.
I can relate to that. I lived in Spain myself for about 5 or 6 years, a bunch of different places. I love Spain. But so you're continuing to follow your beloved Roma from afar, just as you did as a child. How easy is that nowadays? And how easy was it when you were a child in Luxembourg? How possible was that? Were there TV deals? You know, what was that like?
It's funny that you ask, because those are things that I haven't really thought about in a long, long time. I think now that I think about it, one of my sort of the holy grail that I had in my possession for a long while was this book that my dad got me, which was like, it's something that they don't make anymore, but it was like a book that you got if you bought a copy of the famous sports newspaper in Italy called La Gazzetta dello Sport. And this newspaper issued this book for, I think it was a Christmas deal, and my dad got it for me. And it was like an almanac, like a summary of the 2006/2007 season, and you know, with all the results of every game and photos of every game, and like a detailed summary of every game, and who scored and who got a red card, who got a yellow card, you know, like almost like a journal of the season with every team, you know, and that was my way into Serie A, which I could not follow live because I was not living in that Italian reality anymore. And for me, you know, I could follow along, and I would be exposed to all these great players, you know, David Trezeguet and Di Natale and Luca Toni, and, you know, and Mutu and Totti, obviously. You know, I could see who got sacked when, you know, what happened. For me, that was like a primitive way of staying up to date. Although I wasn't staying up to date because it was a summary of a season that had been long gone already. So, but it thrilled me because it really gave me a lot of insight, which I did not have. We had some games available on TV. So the game that I mentioned to you, the Manchester United one, you know, was shown on public TV on Rai Uno, which is the primary channel in Italian TV, and it was, you know, for everybody to see. It was quite quite something. And then I remembered also seeing it on that same channel when Francesco Totti kicked Mario Balotelli in the behind out of anger in the Coppa Italia, which was also quite frustrating. And that was my also my exposition to Roma. But aside from that, we always with friends, we always collected the trading cards. That was big because in Luxembourg there is a big Italian community, so a lot of these shops, they imported the album of the 2008 2009 season or whatever, and we traded cards, and that was also fun, and that also allowed me to get a better idea of what's really happening. So definitely, I think I experienced firsthand what a lot of people nowadays, experience all over the world. I didn't know at that time that Roma could be an international phenomenon. I did not know that fans of Roma existed in places like Indonesia, Australia, the United States, which I now know is a fact. But that, I think, looking back on it, now that you ask me, I think that definitely gave me the hint of an idea that, yes, it's, if you love a football club, it's almost like it's in you, and you'll do anything. You'll take all the scraps, any bit of information, you'll follow along, and that was the case for me living so far away.
And I imagine, obviously, nowadays it's a lot easier to actually follow it live. But if you're traveling around and stuff, what kind of resources are you using for that? I know in the UK we can watch Serie A games on the One Football app, for example, which is a really good resource for that. What about in Spain? Is it on TV, or is there a live streaming option? What's the deal?
Well, in Spain, well, I'm usually in the Canary Islands, and usually I'm staying in Fuerteventura, which is sort of my favorite place on earth right now. And
I'm going to Tenerife in 2 weeks for my friend's
bachelor
party.
I'm in Tenerife right now recording
wow,
this.
That's pretty crazy coincidence.
Yep. I'm in the south of Tenerife, and but my preference is always for Fuerteventura. And in Fuerteventura, there's a lot of Italians, especially where I'm staying in the north. So very often there is plenty of bars and pubs that on Sunday, especially in the afternoon when usually Serie A is on, you go there, and I mean, there is always something on. Usually they follow the big teams, so Milan, Napoli, Juve, Inter, and Roma. So they usually stage these big afternoons. You're sitting in the cafe, there is the sun shining, everybody's having a cup of coffee in the afternoon or in the early evening, because here, it's 1 hour. It's kind of like in the UK time. So whenever you have something playing late in Italy, here it's a bit earlier, so everybody's having a good time, and usually that's my preferred way of tuning in. You see all these people that have escaped Italy for one reason or another and are just basking in the sunshine, and all of them are of different credos and of different faiths in terms of football. But they all come together to that. So whenever there are these screens and they're showing multiple games at once, it's a shared experience. And I think that's great, because for a long while I followed Roma in the worst way possible. When I was studying at university in Aberdeen first, I in the north of Scotland, remote, dark, gray, rainy. There was nothing there. I had to rely on, illegal Bulgarian streams. That was really that. I remembered following along that whole for 2 years that I was there. It was week in, week out illegal streams, because you couldn't find anything else. Like it was crazy. I had looked for like a Roma club or maybe just like a pub where no, it wasn't, because everybody was either watching the Scottish league or the Premier League. So that was the only thing. And I didn't want that. I wanted something else. In Amsterdam, it was easier, because in Amsterdam, there is a Roma club. It's right by the train station. You get a card and you just go up there and watch and wallow in the same misery. And everybody gets high. Obviously, everybody's smoking weed, and you can imagine the atmosphere then. But that was so. So there is always, It's true. Like slowly, it's all becoming more accessible. I think Serie A is a bit more problematic because Serie A has terrible TV deals. Serie A has deals with DAZN, which charges crazy amounts of money and offers a really limited product. So especially when you're abroad and perhaps your internet connection is not too good, it becomes a problem. And so, but I've always tried, especially for the podcast, you always have to come up with something if you want to talk about the match. So that's how I roll.
What about going to the game in person? Have you been fortunate enough to go to many Roma games in person? Home, away.
Yeah, I do, and whenever I'm in Italy, I always try to go back to Rome. It hasn't been the case, I think, in about 2 years, 2.5 years. I did manage in the 2016, 2017 season to get myself a chance to watch one of the games, though it was against Fiorentina, and we did really well. It was a high scoring game, although the atmosphere wasn't as good because there was a lot of tension between the fan base and Luciano Spalletti, who was refusing to play Francesco Totti in his last season. So that was one of the I think one of the final times that I was at the Stadio Olimpico. It's always challenging. We have some patrons of the podcast who do unbelievable stuff. They travel from Australia to watch the games, and I really admire that because it takes time and effort to do that. For me, it's always been a challenge to find the time. Also, when I was at university, to find the money when all the prices are going up, and you're trying to make yourself comfortable in some place in the world. But whenever I can, I love to just go to Rome. And even if I don't have the time to go to the Stadio Olimpico, to just be present in the city and experience what it feels like to be there on a weekend, on a match day. The atmosphere is different. Like you just feel there is a buzz. People are walking around, and you feel like everybody's sort of in a shared haze. Everybody is enjoying this energy, and that is quite comforting. Because you are perhaps not sitting in the stands, you're not hearing the loud cheering of the fans, but you see that that feeling goes way beyond the Stadio Olimpico. It permeates every facet of everyday life. I mean, the bus driver will have a small Roma flag, stuck to his windshield. I mean, that's how, and you go to any bar and everybody's just talking, chatting about what's going to happen today as Roma prepare to play another game. It's everywhere, and I think that's fantastic. And also in that case, it's fantastic because Italians are very expressive, Romans are very expressive people. So you get live updates without actually getting them. Like you're getting a sense of what the community is thinking and what they're looking forward to. It's just, there is an excitement in the air that is very hard to reproduce anywhere else.
And so you've been a devoted fan of the club from afar for a very long time. But when did you start to work on Roma Press? How did that come about, and sort of how did that change your fandom, if at all? Did it quell the passion at all? Because a lot of the people that we speak to on the pod, that's a topic that we like to touch on a lot, is when you go from being a fan to someone who's producing content. Obviously you're still a fan, and like I said, having watched your pod, you are still very passionate, which is really engaging to see. But at the same time, there has to be kind of a slightly more analytical bend. When did that happen, and how did it sort of change how you look at the club?
It's it all happened when when Roma beat Barcelona in that unbelievable comeback.
Oh, incredible.
In 2018, I mean, that not only put us on a map that we hadn't been on in a long time. Like all of a sudden, people took notice. It seemed like for a while people had forgotten about Roma. That was the season right after Totti retired, and it almost felt like we had fallen off a cliff in the eyes of the world. Totti retires, and that's it for Roma, right? For so many years, Totti was the symbol of Roma, and Totti retires, and that's it. Roma are done. Well, when Roma beat Barcelona, there was such incredible excitement because it seemed like nothing of that sort had ever happened to the club. Like, to be in a position where you are trailing behind and you managed to turn it around against one of the biggest clubs in the world was unheard of. And so I remember, following along that season. And then one day I get contacted by John, who founded Roma Press, I believe in 2010 or 11, something along those lines. And it was, for a while, it was mostly just a Twitter account with like updates and, transfer updates and rumors or news that John picked up along the way. John at that time was getting his journalist license in Rome, and he would attend press conferences and that kind of thing, and he would, from time to time, he would just tweet it out in English, which at the time was huge because nobody was doing it in English. That was the thing, is that you couldn't really follow Roma if you didn't speak Italian, because everything that came out about Roma, all the news, all the updates, the newspaper articles, the rumors, the speculations, everything was in Italian. There was not a single source that just specialized in Roma and reproduced that same content, but in English for international audiences. So John started to do that, and then he started the podcast, but it wasn't really going too well. He was doing it on his own, and from time to time he would invite some guests, but it was really, it wasn't taking off the way he'd intended to. And when Roma beat Barcelona, he took it as an opportunity to check if he could find someone else to join him on the pod. So he organized this episode, which you can still find on the streaming platforms, which is right after Roma beat Barcelona. He organized an episode where he invited a bunch of supporters, all guys whom he met on Twitter, and who interacted with Roma Press in the past. And he got them on the episode, and I was one of them. And he had us, give our opinion on the match and discuss what we expected from Roma in the future and blah blah blah. And then eventually, he came back to me and he offered me to become his co-host, and I was that was a big thing because I was I was finishing my first year of my studies in Amsterdam, and I was kind of lonely. I mean, I loved studying, and studying was great for me, but I felt like something else was missing. I felt like I needed to express something, and I think the podcast was a great outlet for that. I could finally tune into games, and right after that we would chat, we would give ratings, we would talk, we would give our opinion. That was a huge boost for me in terms of what I could do with my own free time. But absolutely, going back to your question, how did that evolve? Well, at the beginning, you might say John was basically inviting me to rant. Like, Roma would lose at the last minute, or we would get a red card or something, and he would just message me and he would say, you have something to say? And I would be like, yeah, I can go on for 20 minutes. I can rant. I can be, I can. So I basically, at the beginning, I was voicing, I guess, all the frustration or all the excitement that the other fans were experiencing. I remember there were times where, it was just literally just me going on a whole rant. But then I slowly not slowly, but I steadily understood that sort of you need to put some distance if you want the commentary to be constructive. And what people tune in for is to see that they're not alone. Okay, so you have to remember that, sure, like you cannot get too analytical because you're still speaking to people who are very passionate about the subject that you're speaking. So you have to, in one way, channel what they're experiencing and show them that that they're not on their own, that you're part of it, that you feel that they're sad or you feel that they're happy. At the same time, though, you have to keep it level-headed most of the time, because otherwise you'll just get lost in it. There was a time where if Roma lost a penalty shootout, if Juve won 1-0 at the 90th minute, I would not be able to eat. Like, I would have to record the podcast on an empty stomach, and I would go to sleep. Like, that was how bad I was experiencing this fandom. And I soon realized that if I'm supposed to do it week in, week out on a bi-weekly basis, which is what we're doing now and what we've been doing really for the past 6 years, I can't live it that way. I have to put some distance. Doesn't mean that I should stop following the team, but I have to like look at it from behind the glass. And that's really what I've been doing. Is I've been trying to, interpret every piece of news or every latest development as as something that you have to observe, that you have to form an opinion on, but you also have to find some balance. It's very easy to get, especially in sports, it's very easy to go from one extreme to the other, from utter happiness and exhilaration to absolute fury. And you can't do that. If you're to comment on a team twice per week, you have to be able to be balanced, because that is also something that the people that are listening, that want to know what's happening, that's what they need also. It's a balanced outlook on the situation, so that then they can formulate their own opinion based on what you're saying, based on what they read, and so on. So yes, it took, I would say that it took me about a year, 2 years to really get to that point where I could just come on the podcast, and relatively stress-free, be able to analyze it. And I think that's a healthy way of looking at it. I still, I still think that the best time to be a fan is when you're a kid. When you're a child, you see everything from a really innocent lens, and you see everything in a positive light. And yes, you experience the losses really painfully. You cry, whatever. But there's something that you lose as you grow older in that. I would say that right now I'm happy where I'm at with my kind of way of interpreting Roma.
As you said, when you're a kid, it's a lot more innocent. You're just focusing on the players that you love. You get down when you lose. You go high when you win. But you don't know a lot more about the sort of ins and outs of how the club is run and how the actual sort of machinations of everything, which brings me on to the actual club. So we've talked a lot about your story, which I've really appreciated. Let's talk now. Let's give you a chance now to let some of that passion out and talk about the state of the club right now, because obviously I know a little bit about it, but some of our listeners might be completely oblivious to what is happening at Roma right now. What would you say is the sort of the state of affairs right now at the club?
Well, the state of affairs, long story short, is not good. Roma, in the past 4 years, of this ownership that we've had, an American ownership, the Friedkin family, who are in talks to, well, they're not in talks to anymore. They're about to take over Everton. They, the journey with them had been quite positive from day one. When they appointed Jose Mourinho, and despite his reputation in the Premier League as some kind of troublemaker in Italy, he still had quite the effect, especially on a fan base that hasn't seen a trophy in a long, long time. A fan base that was sort of coming off a really troubling spell in the final years of the previous ownership. The excitement was waning. The team was really at its low. the team had once again failed to qualify for Champions League football, and all of a sudden we appoint Jose Mourinho. That was a big thing. And then obviously we won the Conference League trophy, our first European silverware, first trophy in 14 years. So that was huge. And then we got to the Europa League final for the first time in our history, also huge. Never happened before. But the once Mourinho was gone and Roma appointed Daniele De Rossi in his place, that was also initially met with a bit of outrage. Oh my God, how can you let go of Jose Mourinho? On the other hand, we appointed Daniele De Rossi, club legend, beloved figure. Everybody got behind him. And De Rossi delivered. As an interim manager, he delivered. He came in and he had the team playing again. He had them running after the ball. He had them motivated. He was a great communicator with the players. They all loved him. And the Friedkins thought, okay, well, the results are there, so let's give him a 3-year contract. And they built, a whole summer around Daniele De Rossi as the leading figure of the club, as the leading figure of this 3-year project. It was very exciting to see it happen. Here it is, club legend returns home, a player, a loyal servant of the club, makes his return, and in a time of need, he is the coach, right? Well, the summer was there. The Friedkins spent over 100 million euros on the transfer market, which, again, for Premier League standards may not be a lot, but for Roma, a Roma team that has once again failed to qualify to the Champions League, that's a lot of money. And
even for a sort of, maybe not top, but even for like a similar level club as Roma in England, so like a sort of 6th to 10th type, Spurs type club. That's not nothing, to be fair. 100 million.
No, that's not nothing. But obviously, it's sort of, if you're in the Premier League, I can assure you that even Everton, the money that they make off TV deals exceeds tenfold what Roma make from TV deals. That just to give you an idea of
so for
the
Roma,
realities.
It's a huge investment from the Friedkins.
It's an unbelievable. It's an unbelievable undertaking. Given the fact that Roma are still not out of the financial fair play, given that they don't have their own stadium, given that they haven't qualified to the Champions League for the past 6 years. So that was huge. They built this whole summer around Daniele De Rossi just to let him go after match day 4. And that was really, that episode sort of, caught everybody off guard. And I mean, the fan base, and all kind of respect that the Friedkins had gained throughout this tenure so far, they lost by making that decision. They lost it because the fans felt that the Friedkins were betraying one of their own, betraying a club legend, and in Rome, legends are sacred. You just cannot hurt them. You cannot touch them. One of the main downfalls of the previous ownership had been to try and appoint Francesco Totti as an executive. It failed because Totti felt that he was not being given enough responsibility, and he exited the club amid a lot of controversy. And that was also it. That of ownership was done after that episode. After Totti walking away, the fans were done. They couldn't possibly believe in an ownership that would let go of Totti as a club figure.
And you mentioned the respect that the Friedkins got. One of the things they did was they kind of reached out the olive branch to Totti, right? To try and warm that relationship back up a little bit. Is that right?
Well, those are the rumors. Totti is one thing. Totti is Totti is someone who has an incredible ego, for a reason. He was one of the best Italian players of all time, the best player to wear a Roma shirt, a player who has worn this shirt for 25 years, despite offers from Real Madrid, a guy who had every right to be the way he was. But the problem with Totti is he never really put any effort into becoming, say, a technical director or a sporting director like that. He never did his homework. He never really showed any signs of wanting to invest much time in that. He always expected somehow to be treated like an executive, even though he may not have had the qualifications. But that's the difference with De Rossi. De Rossi, as soon as he retired, he started to attend courses for to become a manager. He got his qualifications. He worked for a number of years for the Italian national team. Then he got a brief opportunity to work in Serie B, which failed after a couple of months. And, he had done his homework. He had worked a lot to be where he was. And it seemed like that was written in the stars. The way this whole thing came about with Mourinho walking away, De Rossi coming into his place, it seemed like that was the perfect fit.
And then he impressed in interim charge, and then shock decision to get rid of him after only 4 games. And now they've gone and done it again before Christmas, right? So we're about to, we have just, you can announce I guess I don't know how new this news is, but it's new to me, and it will be to a lot of our listeners, that the 3rd manager of the season before Christmas has just arrived, Claudio Ranieri, right? So what's been the reaction to that? And in general, what's the overall feeling on the handle that the Friedkins have over the club? Because they do invest a lot of money. It is their own money. They're not indebting the club and stuff, as far as I can tell. No. So that's sort of one positive thing. But what seemed like a fairly stable project before, with Mourinho having several seasons in charge, and then it looks like with De Rossi, okay, we're going to build something new, it's stable. It seems like out of nowhere they've just gone crazy, and now there's 3 managers in a few months. What's the overall feeling about the season now?
Yeah, the feeling is, like you say, that we seemed like like a steady ship, and then all of a sudden everything capsized, and it felt like the Friedkins were always more about the action than the words. They never really spoke. They never spoke to cameras. We don't even know what their voices sound like. They only released a couple of statements in 4 years of their ownership. They've always acted. They splashed a lot of money. They helped boost the club's revenue. They've managed to alleviate the financial fair play restrictions. But in Rome, you have to be able to show yourself, and the Friedkins haven't done that. So there over time, a clear disconnect built between them and the fans, because as long as Mourinho was there to act as the mediator, and as long as Daniele De Rossi was there to act as the link between the fans and the ownership, it was fine, and the fans could get behind a figure. Someone visible from the outside. Once Daniele De Rossi was gone, once our CEO resigned, there was nobody there. Like nobody, no point of reference for the fans to hang on to, to embrace, to speak to directly. So the fans feel lost, and that's the worst thing you can do to Roma fans, is make them feel like they're unheard, and not really. Not make them feel important. That's the worst thing. So for a long while, the Friedkins seem to be putting the fans' happiness at the center of the project. The stadium was sold out for 57 consecutive games, something that never happened before. Every game was a party. And for a while, it really felt like that was something that we could always rely on. Even in the most difficult games, we could always rely on a stadium that was full of excited people. And now those same people are leaving the stadium early. They're not showing up. They remain silent throughout the game, because this disconnect was created out of the Friedkins, decision to sack De Rossi, creating this void. And it really feels like we're navigating from day to day, week to week, which is very demoralizing, because for the better part of these 4 years that they've been here, there was always a sense of them planning everything every step of the way, them always knowing what to do, even in the most difficult situations. Now, Roma fans do feel a bit lost at sea.
Well, what needs to change at the club to try and recapture that good feeling that was there before with Mourinho and then De Rossi?
I think it's always a matter of putting recognizable faces or, figures that do communicate with the club. Like the worst thing that someone can do at Roma is to forget about the fans. I know that because having been involved in our patron group chat for a long time, you get a sense of what the fans want. All the patrons, sort of express what they think is right or wrong. And the common thought is you have to have someone whom the fans can relate to and whom they can speak to and whom they can rely on. And that's the thing that didn't happen after De Rossi was sacked. They appointed Juric, who not a bad coach, but just not someone that the fans cared for. And the CEO was never replaced. I mean, still not replaced as of right now. The sporting director that the Friedkins installed in the summer, Florent Ghisolfi, as competent as he may be, he doesn't speak Italian. So that's a problem, because then the fans immediately have like this sort of, oh my God, like who is this stranger? Why do we need to listen to him? If he needs a translator, why do we need to listen to him talk? We could just read a statement, and that's the same thing. So I think that's the thing that the Friedkins and Roma must do now as soon as possible. The first step, they've already done it, which is they brought in Claudio Ranieri, who will be announced today as we're recording this. He will be announced as Roma's third manager of the season. This is the third time in his career he comes back to the club, and this is, as bizarre as it is to say that about Ranieri, who's 73, who retired in the summer, following the season with Cagliari. He helped them fight against relegation. He helped them stay up in Serie A. He decided to retire from club football. Well, 6 months later, he's back in the game. He is the right choice, just based on the fact that Roma need a figure like him who can communicate with the media and the fans, who has credibility in the eyes of fans, who is known by the players, whom the players can relate to. A guy who has strong ties to the club, who loves the club. He's always been a fan. He lives in Rome. He's all about Roma. So the Friedkins somehow in my opinion, they saved the situation from spiraling out of control by appointing Ranieri. That's the first step. And then everything else has to happen. So the CEO must be appointed. At the end of the season, I do expect even, for example, Ranieri becoming a club executive, because that is something that's been talked about a lot. The idea is to have Ranieri, slot in from coach to executive and become, say, a technical director, just to exactly create that link, have that link with the fans alive, and not lose sight of it, not forget where you are, because the Friedkins are clearly building a brand. They want Roma to be international. They want Roma to be recognized, but they also must never forget that the fans care way too much about sort of preserving a local traditional spirit, and you have to respect that. You have to respect that request.
So, Andy, you are by far one of the most passionate fans we've ever had on this show, for sure. And you said yourself that you're penchant for a good rant when things are going badly. We've talked about some of the sort of the negatives of what's been going on in recent months, but let's end on a high. What would you say is the best thing about being a Roma fan?
Yeah, well, I do think that it's a humbling experience. I think that's the best thing about Roma, is that at least the way I interpret it, really, Roma has always been very reflective for me as of life in general. Like, Roma prepares you for life. Roma, with Roma, you really have so many highs and lows, and when the good moments are there, everybody makes the best of it. When the bad moments are there, everybody gets together and tries to find some common ground, something to hang on to. And Roma makes you dream, and Roma makes you understand that that everything is possible when you're passionate about something. You can take a lot away from a person. I'm not coming up with this, but this is more or less a quote from a favorite movie of mine, an Argentine film called The Secret in Their Eyes. And there is a quote about that a guy says, and he says something akin to, you can take away a lot from a person. You can take away, their money. You can take away their job. You can take away their religion. You can take away a lot of things. You cannot take away their passion. Passion is always there, and passion gets you through a lot in life. I'm not saying that being passionate about Roma gets me through the bad days, but I do think that sort of when you are a fan of Roma, you'll learn about adversity, you learn about disappointment, you learn about also the great levels of happiness that you can experience on some rare occasions, and you really have to cherish them. And that's always been the case for me ever since I was a child. I mean, one of my favorite memories is Luca Toni scoring against Inter. It was Jose Mourinho's Inter. Claudio Ranieri was the coach. 2010, Roma came this close to winning the Scudetto against Jose Mourinho's treble-winning Inter. And they did so with Luca Toni, who was on loan for 6 months. And he scored against Inter. And for just that brief second, it felt like we will win the Scudetto, and we will do so by being underdogs. We didn't win the Scudetto, but I just remember the happiness that I felt. I remember emulating Tony's celebration, with the hand around his ear. That was always for me just that idea of, an underdog who gets himself in a position to hope for the best. That's always something that I believed in. I believe in the underdog, and that's why I guess I believe in Roma. Continue to do so despite a lot of hardships, a lot of disappointment. But in the long run, it really teaches you some fundamental things about life.
A beautiful note on which to end. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us, and best of luck for the rest of the season. Forza Ranieri. Before we go, could you remind our listeners how they can check out your work, how they can follow Roma in the English language?
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig, so much for having me. It was my pleasure to be here. If people are interested in following Roma or knowing a little bit more about Roma, I recommend, first of all, the podcast, the Roma Press Podcast, which has grown a large following over the years. You can find it on any streaming platform. You can also find it on YouTube at AS Roma Press. We have the video version of it there, so you can watch as me and my co-host John. We cry and of happiness, or we cry real tears after each game. We do it twice a week, and then there is obviously the social media channels at AS Roma Press on Twitter. We're very active on Facebook, and finally the website, which is romapress.net. That is where we upload all the latest information, news, rumors, and so on and so forth. So that is really the number one source, the number one website for English-speaking fans of Roma all over the world.
Thanks so much, Andy. All the best.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks so much for listening to the Sporticos Football Stories podcast. It was such a pleasure speaking to Andy today. Probably one of the best episodes we've done. And we can't wait to bring you more chats with fans from across the footballing landscape, from ex-pros to bloggers, YouTubers, and more. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing. If you really liked it, give us a 5-star review wherever you get your pods. That will help us out so much. Thanks again, and catch you next time on the Sporticos Football Stories podcast.